When it comes to your retirement income plan, are you leaning into an old-fashioned and or out-of-date model? Because when it comes to your retirement income, what you don't want to do is be out of date with that at all. It's the most important thing. It's the first thing that we need to have within our retirement plan. Would you say that is accurate?
Well, retirement finances are a little bit different than fashion, right? It was the other day, my 15-year-old daughter was coming out, and she kind of had like bell-bottom things. And like,
Bell-bottoms are
and I
back,
was like,
baby.
oh my gosh, are the Bee Gees back? What is happening here? If you pull out a butterfly collar, and have some pastel mushroom, like a Pollock type print on the inside, I would swear that this is the 70s when I was born, right? But and I was just like, are those back in? And she's like, yeah,
Coming
Dad.
back.
Totally back. So, it's very different. So most of the things, now, fashion is different, right? Fashion is just all about what people feel about things, right?
And
When it comes
can
to
be about a lot of
finances,
things, yeah.
yeah, when it comes to finances, it's a little bit different because things evolve, right? Things evolve over time. Technologies replace a lot of other things, right? It used to be that you would dig a hole and you'd make a little fire down there, and that was your oven. And then all of a sudden we actually had ovens, and now we have air fryers. Imagine that, right?
Yeah.
Right? How great is that? So that's the evolution. Now, does anyone gonna want to go back and start cooking in a hole? Well,
no. And to your point, because fashion does have cycles, like clothing, style fashion has cycles, and things do come back in fashion. But have you, in your career, how long have you been financial advisor now at this point?
Started off in 1998.
Okay, so in your career between 1998 to 2025, have you seen something old come back into fashion in the way of financial investments or I know I'm putting you on the spot, and that's
no. I mean, what I would say is not really, right? So I think anything that's fundamental makes sense. You have assets that have risk, and you have assets that are safe. Now, that has always been fundamental. So for so long, for so many years, people were just looking for mutual funds that did this strategy or did that strategy. What they found out in the end, a quality index fund like from Vanguard or Fidelity or Schwab or T. Rowe Price or whatever, they were probably just as good, if not better, and they were a lot less expensive. So the fundamentals never change. Unlike fashion, they should have never gone out of style. Now, some of us, we get enamored in this stuff. Well, it doesn't have LV on it. Or, hold on, that's not a Tory Burch. Or, oh, those are my Ferragamos. Whatever nonsense that is.
The evidence you just gave that you live in a house full of women has
nothing
never
but
been
women.
so clear.
This is all the crud I hear.
I'm like, how do you know the names of these fashion labels?
Because I look at my credit card statement. I'm like, what am I paying for?
What is Louis Vuitton?
What is Louis Vuitton? That makes no sense. It's like, Dad. I'm like, whatever. All I know is that they've had that same bag for 38 years. You should have gotten one from the Salvation Army or whatever. I'm sure there's one over there.
There's got to be
they're that old. It's okay. But, they don't change the style very much, and you can look at a lot of luxury vehicles. They don't change the models very much. You can look at like the Lexus or the Mercedes. They don't change that much. The Porsche, certainly. I mean, 25 to 30 years, and they finally give it a facelift. It's really interesting. But when it comes to finances, I think that as things evolve, you just always want to make sure you have good fundamentals. But as they evolve, I mean, things get better. You can have better safety nets on some assets, but you can still invest in market indexes. I think that's one of the more interesting things that we've seen happen over time. And by the way, in no way is this meant to look at only a strategy or a product or a design like that. But there are things that you can actually get insured by an insurance company or a bank, but they'll still allow you to participate in the upside of like the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ or take your pick. But they will still protect your downside. No, they're not always right, and it depends on interest rates and how these things are offered. But those are things that did not exist 25 years ago, when I first started. I mean, they weren't even around. They weren't even thought of yet. But now, because of the options markets and the derivatives markets, they can be very exotic. But if it's just simple, it's like, hey, you're going to get downside safety, but on the upside, you may get 7, 8, or 9% of the upside of the market. Well, some people look at that and say, well, that's not so bad. If you expect the market over the next 10 years to do okay, maybe those are okay. But those are things that as they evolve, they just give us more opportunities, because I would put those in a safe bucket, especially if you have protection on your principal from a bank or an insurance company, and you probably shouldn't lose it unless one of those companies goes under, and hopefully that doesn't happen. But as long as it doesn't, but you get more upside than the current 3 or 4 or 5% interest rates, those are okay. So as things evolve, we just want to be paying attention to that. It doesn't mean that they're a fit for anyone. It just means that those are things that I find to be very interesting. It used to be you had to go buy a house to invest in real estate. Now there's all kinds of ways to invest in real estate. As a matter of fact, I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and he said, John, could I potentially buy into like any professional sports teams? And I'm like, that is a really interesting concept. Well, you can. So that, believe it or not, there's a couple companies out there that actually get small fractional ownership of like the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Golden State Warriors or the Boston Red Sox. And yes, you can actually be a sliver of an owner in a lot of pro sports franchises. Now, why would someone do that? I did the research on it. If you look at the big three, so baseball, hockey, and basketball, the average returns for those owners are anywhere between 19 to 24% a year. So you're like, well, hold on. Whoa, what are you talking about? Well, to be a big three owner of sports franchise, you typically have to be knighted. Like that's the United States version of being royalty.
Yeah.
So like you have to be not only a billionaire, but you also have to be a certain quality individual, is what they would typically say, where they want to bestow you that opportunity, right? Doesn't happen to everyone. But you look at those returns, it's like, hold on, maybe I could put, 25, 30 grand in something like that and maybe get those type of returns. Believe it or not, those exist out there. So again, as things evolve and you get those opportunities, it doesn't mean you clamor out there to go buy sports teams. But it is interesting, right? And it's something that's pretty cool to talk around the water cooler with your buddies.
Okay.
As you're getting ready to go, rewire some electrical panels. You say, hey, I own the Cleveland Cavaliers. You're like, what? You do what now? Well, not all of it.
I mean,
I'm a partial owner.
I got a piece of the pie.
I'm a partial owner. I get one half of one shoelace on one of the bench players' sneakers.
Nothing wrong
that
with
was in
it.
the trash can.
You
But it's
got a little
okay
piece of the pie.
because I have
Makes
that.
you feel good.
That's mine.
Something that obviously never goes out of fashion, is never not on people's want list, is the idea of income. As we were first starting here, is understanding our retirement income plan and ensuring that it is up to date is critical when you are now responsible for creating your own income as you've entered into retirement. Many people who are watching this podcast, who are listening to this program, are very familiar. I mean, these are people that seek out financial advice and education. So they are familiar with the names Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman.
Sure.
And those two individuals have helped many Americans when it comes to doing things like erasing debt and becoming more financially independent. However, financial author David McKnight is calling their approach, Dave and Susie, their approach to income planning, quote, more paint by numbers, which I feel is a little brutal.
That's a little bit of a slap.
That's a term of respect.
Yeah.
Their plan is more paint by numbers. And he says much of the pair's advice is, quote, outdated and one size fits all.
I agree with that. I agree completely. So David McKnight has done a pretty interesting amount of work on looking at tax code and tax studies in the United States, specifically when it comes to retirement. And what he has found is very different than what you'll hear from a Dave Ramsey or a Susie Orman. They typically, in my opinion, they do a masterful job on how to keep us out of debt or to do the things to not have a whole bunch of debt. I think for the average person, that is great information that's good to have. Does that teach you how to get wealthy? Not really. And for that reason, when it comes to amassing wealth and having money, we've really just wanted all of our investments to pay us an income, right? If you knew that you had $100,000 coming in every year, couldn't you kind of do whatever you wanted, knowing, unfortunately, I spent some money, I shouldn't have done that. But the very next month, you're going to have like $9,000 added to that bank account again. That's not bad. That used to be how pensions operated, right? But David McKnight, what he found is there's one thing about saving money, but it's how much of that we get to use, we get to keep. How much do we get to spend, and how much do we have to spend to the government, basically in the form of taxation? And what he realized was when you've done a really good job saving, like you've saved $1 million to, let's say, $10 million. You've done an exceptionally good job saving. Often the way that we've put that money in our buckets, the way we've saved that money is going to cost us a fortune in taxation. And what he says is once you actually show someone that, and we do this in my office all the time, I think that McKnight's research started years ago, started me thinking about that as well. It's like, man, if you've done a good job saving, what else can you do? Ooh,
Yeah.
well, let's keep more of it for ourselves and for our families and give less of it to the government. Because when you're in an oppressive tax rate, guys, if you're in the highest federal tax rate, which is nearly 40%, and you have a state tax, and you may have a local tax, and you have a net investment income tax, you may be giving 50% of your money to the government. That's half. They get half. Now imagine if you could reposition that and not give the government half for the rest of your life. Could you save some money? You can. You can save fortunes, absolute fortunes. So I do agree that McKnight says, hey, you know, Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey are off on this 100% because it is not blanket. Everyone is different. You have to do your own math. Should you do asset shifting? Should you get more money in tax-free accounts? Should you consider a Roth even in your 70s? This is one of those things that I've heard people talk about all the time. CPAs all the time are like, John, I don't think that that's appropriate. They haven't done the math. They haven't done the math. What is going to be the taxes on the RMDs for that client? What are going to be the taxes on their Social Security for that client? If they make the transition, consider doing Roth conversions or using some strategic uses of life insurance. If they did that correctly, could they potentially pay a fortune less in taxation? Most of us, the answer is yes. And McKnight has done a pretty good job at that. We do that in our office too. McKnight is one of them. There are several others. Even Tony Robbins wrote a book and had an entire chapter on understanding what you're going to give the government as a silent partner in your IRA. And I found that to be, it really is. It's like,
that's another brutal slap in the face type
isn't
thing.
it?
It's like, FYI, America, you're the government's silent partner. It's like, I am not. Oh,
right.
Really?
It's like, imagine you do all the work, you do all the hassle, you do all of the growing and the money and the protection, and you sacrifice the ability to spend. And at the end of the day, someone, let's call them Uncle Sam, is going to end up with 30 to 40% of all of that blood, sweat, and tears you put in. That's absolutely a silent partner. So can you give them a smaller share? Well, you're going to have to pay them at some point in time. But if you do it correctly, you could pay them a lot less over the course of your lifetime or a surviving spouse's lifetime or even your kids. So that's what McKnight's talking about. That is a huge piece of the puzzle. That's the third most important thing when it comes to retirement planning in our office. Number one is protecting what we got. Number two is developing income. Number three is keeping it away from the government legally, honestly, and ethically so that we can use it or give it to the kiddos.
Is your retirement income plan, and perhaps maybe in some cases your tax plan, out of date? Is it based on previous models that need to be updated? They're so-called out of fashion. Let's bring your plan up to date, up to the year 2025, and ensure that you've got these different areas covered. This is what John and his team are here to help you figure out. RetirementSolutionShow.com is our website, and where to start the conversation with John and his team at J. Hagan Capital, understanding what you've got working for you, what you might need to update or change. And also when it comes to your retirement plan, what was working for you in your working years now needs to change just because of this different phase of your financial life. These are all the things that go into all the plans that they create, that they can create with and for you as well, customized to your goals. Again, it's retirementsolutionsshow.com, or just click on the links we got posted in the show notes.